Welcome to Impact TV. My name is Jack Crawford. I'm the host of a corporate venture video series that showcases top corporate venture capitalists in the world. We're excited to have Dr. Yvonne Lutsch, an investment principal from Robert Bosch Venture Capital, here with us today. Hi, Yvonne. How are you?
Hi, Jack. I'm very well. Nice to meet you here, and happy to be here.
So how are you? How have you navigated through the last year and a half of craziness with the pandemic and other things? Are you holding up okay?
I think so. I mean, now everyone knows my living room background because I'm sitting here at this desk for 1.5 years. Yeah, but I mean, so far it went pretty well. I did 2 what I call COVID deals. So, I mean, professionally, everything continued almost as normal. Actually, we were very, very busy and we did good investments. And even though we were not able to meet the entrepreneurs, it was still possible to do investments. Thanks to Zoom and all these other tools, it worked.
The acceleration curve, the innovation curve is accelerated, and the pace of business in the venture world seems to have accelerated. So let's see, you started with Bosch in the early 2000s, and you've had a variety of roles. It was interesting to learn a little bit about some internal sort of startup efforts, and obviously a lot of external investing efforts. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your journey at Bosch.
Yeah, okay, happy to. So yeah, I started in the early 2000s, and I started as a quality engineer in our semiconductor plant. That time, the only one we had. And I had different roles in the semiconductor, consumer MEMS, and electronics industry. And then I joined and you mentioned this briefly, so I joined a Bosch subsidiary, which was at that time a very small company. So I was employee number 58. So like with real startups, we were like counting. So everyone had a number. And I think this was a great experience because this was like a real startup. We had, in principle, we had roles, but everyone was responsible for everything because you didn't want anything to fall through the cracks. This was a great experience. We also knew, every employee knew the current revenue figures and how many sensors we sold the last month. And we were also under a lot of pressure and scrutiny from the Bosch mothership, because there was always a risk that they shut us down if we cannot show either growth or profitability or both. So that was actually pretty close to a real startup, except unfortunately we had no stock options.
So at Robert Bosch Venture Capital, we were reading that you're investing in entrepreneurs that sort of help to shape the future of human living space, whether at home, work, or on the road. Can you talk a little bit more about sort of the industry sectors and sort of stage of investments that you're making in entrepreneurial companies?
Yeah, so I think many people know Bosch probably as being the largest automotive tier 1 in the world, but some other people actually rather know our dishwashers. And this slogan is all about that Bosch is kind of ubiquitous. We are everywhere. We are in your car, we are in your e-bike, we are in your home, and also in, if probably you work in a more industrial setting, we have also industrial solutions, and also like smart home solutions. So we are almost everywhere as a system component or whatever supplier. And I think that's what the slogan is about. And this also makes our investment very, very broad. So I always like to say, we look into startups in the areas of autonomous driving to smart dishwashers and everything in between. And, this can be even like quantum computing, cloud, AI. I mean, everything what is technical, but also like very futuristic and cool nowadays.
Was there a particular reason that RBVC sort of established a corporate venture arm? I mean, I've seen a pattern of corporate venture activities. Sometimes it's identifying interesting technical talent and looking at acqui-hires. Sometimes it's looking at new product lines that help to bolster the next $1 billion of revenue. Other times it's just a visibility campaign to just sort of, keep a pulse on the next wave of innovation in interesting areas like, security or IoT or some of these other areas. Can you talk a little bit about RBVC and sort of why they initially got into the corporate venture capital game?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of everything you mentioned. So Bosch Venture Capital, we started in 27. And I think the main reason was actually to strengthen Bosch innovation. So Bosch is one of the large corporations who still afford a in-house large corporate research team, and that's the internal funnel for innovation. But Bosch also realized that that's probably not enough any longer, because there's so much external innovation and startups can act so fast, they can be so flexible, they can pivot around and figure out the next big business model. And we at some point we realized we probably cannot catch up with the world, with the industry, if we do everything in-house. So we wanted to open Bosch for open innovation. And one vehicle to make people, the whole organization, aware of what's going on there is a venture capital group, to invest in startups, and through the investment we are in the ecosystem, right? And we see very, very good startup deals, and we see also the very high quality startups. Without a venture capital arm, you are probably not able to see them. Mm-hmm. Not the best, and we want to work with the best. So that's I think one major reason.
One of the companies that one of the companies and industry sectors that you and I spent a little bit of time talking about was Kornami in the confidential computing and sort of fully homomorphic encryption space. It'd be interesting for you to comment sort of on that market broadly. How is RBVC thinking about confidential computing? Obviously, if you look at Intel and IBM and some of the other companies out there, they're really leaning in to fully homomorphic encryption and other things related to data security using high performance computing. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could speak a little bit about your view on sort of the future of security technology and high performance computing in particular.
So I know from my Bosch colleagues that confidential computing is definitely a topic, and distributed computing, right? Whether this is with fully homomorphic encryption or other means, that's I think still open, but definitely FHE, it's just easier to say, is one of the contenders. And for example, Konami, with having a specific hard architecture, specific AI chips to support in particularly FHE computation, I think that's pretty interesting. As you know, we also invested in other AI accelerators, and we see more and more hardware architectures very specific to one very specific use case. Because like 2-3 years ago, we saw I talked to 70 or so AI accelerators, and they were all over the place. But now they are all becoming more and more special. And I think this opens up like real world use cases. And Konami is one example. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for your comments on the space and on the company. Let's talk about RBVC's sort of return objectives from an investment standpoint. Are you mostly thinking about sort of strategic value, technology enhancement, those types of things that provide significant strategic value to the larger corporation, or is this more about financial returns and or some blend of both? Maybe you could just talk about your objectives from a return standpoint.
Yeah, I think it's of course it's kind of both. I mean, we are a CVC, but as I told you that we want to work with the best startups, and we want to see the best startups. We believe that being financially focused makes us more attractive for startups to take our money, because this ensures that our goals are aligned. So we are financially focused. So as every financial VC, we have the same metrics. But of course, we want to see a strategic fit to Bosch. But that's basically it. So we don't need a business unit blessing. We don't need a contract. We don't need a perform proof of concept. Of course, we are talking to our Bosch colleagues, and we are also probably listening to them, right? Because they also have, they have a lot of expertise, but eventually we make our own decisions where we invest and why. And that's at the end for financial return.
Sounds like you're operating fairly independently, like the traditional venture capital community. It's been interesting for us to see corporate venture capital sort of migrate from participating in 1 out of every 10 venture capital backed companies to maybe now 1 out of every 3. And I think it's groups like yours that are sort of leading the way and operating more autonomously without business unit sponsorship, without a customer contract required, and really operating more like a financially focused VC.
Yeah, I think Bosch did a great job there, and I know from my colleagues who were there from the beginning with Robert Bosch Venture Capital that the strategy guys did really a very, very deep due diligence on what is the right structure, and I think they did a great job.
When you look at companies that you're going to invest in or entrepreneurs that you're going to back, are there certain qualities or character traits, certain elements of a company or of an entrepreneur that make it a bit more interesting, a bit more engaging, that have you sort of lean in? Maybe you could talk about, as the entrepreneurial community sort of thinks about approaching Bosch for an acquisition or RBVC for an investment, sort of what are the things that, you find yourself drawn toward?
Yeah, that's 2 different questions actually, and I think there are also 2 different answers to investment or acquisition, and I will explain a little bit. So from an investment standpoint, since we are financially focused, it's kind of similar like in real estate, right? Location, location, location. With venture capital, it's probably team, team, team.
Yeah.
If the team is not the one who has like the charisma, the smartness, and the guts to pull it off, then you can have the greatest technology in the world. Unfortunately, it doesn't help you. And me as a physicist, it's very, very hard for me to see that technology by itself doesn't sell, but that's just the fact. So we look into, just great people, entrepreneurs who convince us that they are the right people to make it happen, or to grow if they could, show some initial traction already. I think for an acquisition, for a pure acquisition play, I think it might be a little bit different, and I'm not the M&A specialist, so please bear with me. But for M&A, you probably look rather for very, very defendable technology. You can probably integrate, and then you can pull it off internally because it just fits what Bosch is probably doing or plan to do anyway. Or you also do probably acqui-hire, right? Nowadays, the war of talent, people are talking about this for years, but it's getting tougher and tougher. So acqui-hires might be also an option. And then it's more about, how many really, really great engineers do they have? So that's a different aspect. But for us, it's really a lot about the people, the team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for us as well, Impact Venture Capital is primarily not only investing in seed and early stage companies where you heavily weight, team, as you say, because that's everything in the early stages. But we're also focused on artificial intelligence companies, oftentimes, as you know, investing alongside of corporates like Intel and Baidu and Yamaha, SK Hynix, and a number of others. As RBVC looks at building syndicates, do you find yourself mostly building syndicates with other corporate venture groups? How are you interacting with other corporate venture groups and other traditional venture capital firms?
I think it's all of it. There's a long list of very, very, close VC friends, especially in the corporate VC world, especially people who think and act very, very similar like us, like being independent and less strategic and more financially focused. Yeah, you mentioned Intel, M12, BMW Ventures, and the ones you mentioned. We talk to all of them on a more or less regular basis to share deal flow and to share like intelligence. But it always depends. We also invest with a large tier 1 financial VCs like the Sequoias and the NEAs and the Mayfields of the world, with all of them. And yeah, as you said, I mean, we totally believe in a strong syndicate because we think that's the best for the startup, right? They need probably another round of financing, and you don't want to be the only one who is helping them, who is sponsoring them. So a good syndicate from early on is a very, very strong support.
From an investment style standpoint, do you find yourself leading most investments? Are you taking board seats? Can you talk a little bit about sort of typical ticket size? Just sort of describe, sort of what you're targeting sort of from an investment style.
Yeah, so I think we probably lead half of our investments, a little bit more, I would say, in Europe and Israel, where RBVC is just a little bit stronger because there is less competition at the end in terms of venture capital money. In US, we're also leading. We do co-leads. We also follow. If that's a good deal and we follow and we get a board observer seat, we're also happy. Mm-hmm. But we like to be on the board. And as you also mentioned, we are very, very independent from the mothership, from Bosch. There is also an official kind of Chinese wall between us and the Bosch business unit, and we think that's important. But of course, we can still, open the doors to the Bosch business people. So therefore, we think that we are a very valuable board member. Typical check sizes you mentioned. So since we are more or less stage agnostic, but still pretty early, maybe similar to you. So we invest from Series C to maybe Series D or so. A typical check size, I would say, is maybe $4 to $6 million US. Mm-hmm. And we go as low as maybe 500K, and we go as high as maybe 8 million.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
And since we are financially focused, we are also having a fund structure like a financial VC, and we keep reserves for follow-on investments. So yeah, think of us rather like a financial VC with a strategic. Where we want to see a strategic angle to Bosch.
The reserves, are they, out of curiosity, are they 100 to 300% reserve on the original investment? How much of a reserve is it typically that you're setting aside for follow-on rounds? Is there a standard percentage, or is it more on a case-by-case basis?
It's not standard. We do this case by case, and we discuss this in our worldwide team, and we also rediscuss, at the end of the investment period of a fund, maybe some of the follow-on reserves are changing. Maybe we have to allocate more or less. So that's a very dynamic process. We probably spend 50 to 60%, I would say, in the first investments and keep the rest for reserves.
That's helpful.
Roundabout.
Okay. As a physicist and someone with a technical background, are there certain industry sectors or technologies that really excite you over the next 3 to 5 years? Is there something that you find yourself spending a little bit more time on? I mean, we're looking at AI as it applies to security and finance and health, and finding some really interesting companies that are a convergence of those industry sectors, really with technology that applies across. That apply across a variety of markets. Is there anything that you find yourself particularly interested in and leaning into a little bit as it relates to the next 3 to 5 years?
Since you mentioned physics, I think quantum computing, the next 3 to 5 years are really, really exciting. I mean, I remember when I was in my PhD grad school, I was at a conference and this person had a poster session and she explained to me that she's building a quantum computer. And I'm like, what? So this was the first time, and this is more than 20 years ago, I heard of quantum computing. And I was like, I will never see this in real life in my entire life. Now it looks, maybe there will be something in 3 to 5 years. So this is very, very, very exciting to me.
I'm going to shift. We just have a couple of minutes left. I'm going to shift to a sort of the rapid fire Q&A part of the program today. And so if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions on the personal front. Oftentimes I like to learn, and I know the audience likes to learn from other successful professionals. You're an investor at a major corporate venture capital group. You're operating in a kind of a high performance environment. Is there something that you do to maintain a high level of professional excellence? Do you find yourself with any regular sort of professional development effort that allows you to stay on the cutting edge of corporate venture capital?
If you count like exercising and fitness, then yes. I totally believe in a healthy mind lives in a healthy body. So I'm a runner and I run almost every day. So this morning I went out at 5:45 or so, very early in the morning to squeeze it in the day. That's probably more personal. I mean, other than that, I just try to stay on top of everything. It's hard, but I mean, when I run, I listen to audiobooks. I'm currently actually listening to Bill Gates' last book, How to Avoid Climate Disaster. I mean, there are mixed reviews about the book, but still, I think it makes sense to be on top of these things. They're very, very good podcasts. I'm currently listening to one called All In, with some of the Silicon Valley guys, and it's very, very funny, but also very informative. I mean, I try to read a lot, all these newsletters, things. I mean, you have to do it, right? There's no way around it. And other than that, I mean, just use your brain and stay polite and kind. I think that's important.
Well, you mentioned one of my favorite things, running and audiobooks. I just sort of feel like you're getting a 2-for-1 out there. You're building your brain and building your body.
Totally.
I always feel like we're running out of time in life, and we need to make the most of every hour. And to your point, that's one of those opportunities for a 2-for-1. Is there any other podcast, blog, or audiobook that you wanted to specifically mention? Is there something that you find yourself going back to again and again that you really enjoy and appreciate?
Nothing specific, but I'm just mentioning one audiobook I recently listened to because I'm a physicist again. So this is I don't recall the author because it's a Chinese person, and it's called The Three-Body Problem, and it's a trilogy, and it's like, as a book, it's like this thick, and the guy who wrote the books is a scientist in a nuclear power plant in China, and apparently not a very exciting job. It's definitely worth reading because everything, is there, like aliens, quantum computing, like a different view on semiconductors, AI, famines, pandemics. It's all climate disaster. It's everything in the book. So I would totally recommend to read that.
We're out of time for today, but Yvonne, thanks so much for letting us have a little bit of your afternoon and sharing some of the details on what's happening at RBVC. This was educational for me and entertaining. I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time today.
Thanks for having me, Jack.